All right, guys, we're in the build room. We have a diff from RCAWD Drive. It is the LSD diff, and we have a bulkhead from Scorched. This bulkhead is broken, so we're not going to keep this, but for the purpose of this video, we'll be using this to set this diff inside once we've done all the other processes. So, I've been asked a lot lately about how I do this. I do have a video, but I do feel like this was necessary to add a couple of updates to the actual process itself and, you know, just give you a better idea of what exactly I'm doing to make these diffs last. Because I think oftentimes, or not think, I've seen it, I've gotten the comments and the questions, you know, a lot of guys break differentials, and this is something I rarely have. I rarely have either ring pinion, sun, or spider gear failures. I just don't. So I don't really feel like I'm doing anything all that special, but because I get the question and because I've been asked so many times, I went ahead, I figured it was a good idea to go ahead and show the process. Basically everything from the diff itself to how I put the diff in the actual bulkhead and how that gets shimmed out. So basically, so we've got an RCAWD Drive diff. I should say before I do any, I've done a lot of this. I basically built this entire thing before off camera because I don't want to have to go through that process on camera and bore you guys to death. But at least I can show you exactly what goes into it. But one thing I wanted to state first is before you do anything with any of this, everything that you see here on this mat is all been cleaned beforehand with brake clean. Nothing in this diff, the housing, the parts, you know, nothing in this diff should have any kind of residue on it, because you want, you know, in particular for your Loctite. So like, for example, the diff cup itself, these little holes here where the screws will go into, need to be completely dry, no fluids, no residue, nothing on both sides, because that's where your bolts are going to go to hold this whole thing together. And if for whatever reason that Loctite doesn't hold, you're going to have a failure. So if one of these little bolts gets loose and your sun gears start to pull apart because it's not held down in place, you're going to have a failure. So you can shim it right, you can build it right, you can do everything right, but not have those bolts made, you know, clean, or those bores cleaned off well. The Loctite doesn't hold, and no matter how well you build the diff, it's gonna break, you know. So, you know, it's something I've emphasized quite a few times. You know, every little thing that goes into building this, when it's done right, then you don't have failures. And obviously you can still have failures, but the likelihood is dramatically decreased. So starting off with the diff cup, or actually starting off with one of some guys call it the crown gear. I call it a ring gear because I come from automotive. In automotive, this would be considered the ring gear, and this would be considered the pinion gear. You know, that's how they engage, but I'm gonna call it a ring gear. I usually start with this. So I'll put as I'm explaining this, I'll put the part numbers up on the screen, but the RCAWD Drive diff comes with give me a second here. Oh, Jesus. The RCAWD Drive diff comes with an O-ring already pre-installed, okay? This is one detail that I don't know if I put in the original video, but it comes pre-installed with an O-ring that looks like this. I'll try to take a picture of it so you get a better idea of what it looks like. And what I've come to learn is that this O-ring is very, very thick, okay? So when you compare it to an Arrma O-ring, I'll take this one out, it's way thicker than an Arrma O-ring. And if you look down here, you know, you'll see that the O-ring from RCAWD Drive and the O-ring from Arrma look completely different. The O-ring from Arrma almost looks like it wouldn't even seal because it's so much thinner, okay? But the reason why all-wheel drive does this, obviously, I don't have confirmation from the manufacturer, but this is just what I have come to find. This is what I think is happening, why a lot of guys have failures with these things out of the box. Because what RCAWD Drive is doing is they're using this O-ring like a preload spring, okay? So they're putting the shim on top, the sun gear on top, and then that O-ring basically is essentially too thick, but because it's an O-ring, it'll squeeze down And then what it does is, as it springs back, it kind of takes up the slack of the space between the sun gear and the spider gears. The problem with that is that it's not a set position. As it wears and as the O-ring starts to deteriorate, you start to lose that mesh, and then eventually the diff will fail. And I've tried it. I've tried not replacing the O-rings, but shim it according to what I need, what I think is okay, and it'll still break, because that O-ring serves as a preload, and you can't get true mesh because you're actually using a spring to take up the slack. So the first thing I do is take the diff apart, obviously, to its individual pieces. I use a Tupperware or a bin to put brake clean inside of, and then I take all my parts, put it inside. I use just a regular little paintbrush, and I just kind of clean everything off so that everything's nice and dry and clean and has no gear oil. That's another automotive term. No diff fluid in it. So then the first thing I do is, obviously it's gonna have a new bearing if you have a new diff. But if you have an old diff, I will put that up on the screen too, which is the type of bearing that this takes. You can buy them on Amazon in bulk. I think like 10 at a time, really cheap. So you're gonna put your bearing on, obviously. Then the other big important thing that I've changed and have added to since that first video is the GPM OUTDRIVES. These GPM OUTDRIVES have proven to be absolutely insane in durability. If you've looked through my video library of all my 6S Arrmas and the way I bashed them, you've seen that I've taken Frankie to the skate park. I've taken the Typhon to the skate park. I've taken the Krallian and the Creighton and all these cars to the skate park. All those cars, and we all know that skate parks are stupidly harsh on the car. At no time, whether it's at the big ramp going 200 feet or 180 feet or at the skate park, do I have OUTDRIVE failures, okay? It just doesn't happen. You know, it might happen eventually when it's already worn down and it's had 10 packs going through it, but GPM OUTDRIVES is the ticket. So, bearing on, OUTDRIVE on. Now, I've already got one of my plates. That's another thing I do. One of these plates for the LSD action is already pre-installed, and I put that in there because it should fit sort of like within the gasket that's already here. So I like to install it and kind of have it stuck onto the gasket so it kind of stays in place. So you've got your OUTDRIVE, your bearing, you've got your OUTDRIVE. Then the next thing I do is put my O-ring in here. Now, what I do is I take my this thing here, which is like the little wrench that you get from the box, and I use the 7mm side, and I push the O-ring down. And that helps, you know, because your fingers have a hard time kind of putting it down, so I just take the 7mm side, slide it down, and it puts the O-ring pretty much in place. And that simplifies that part. Now, here's one of the crucial parts. In order to get this mesh correct and get everything inside to mesh as tight as possible without binding, which I've said 1,000 times it feels like, you want to get yourself a set of shims. You need to set your mesh. Now, the way that you do that is by using these shims. These shims, I will put the part number up on screen. It'll also be in the description. But these come in 4 sizes. I believe it's 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.5. So I've already done this off screen, like I said, off camera, I should say, for time savings. But essentially what I've got is a 0.1, I've got a 0.1, a 0.2, and a 0.3. So for total, you have basically 0.8 millimeters of shimming. So what I do is I take these, put these shims inside on the OUTDRIVE, right? Same process, I'll take my 7 and I'll go ahead and set that down, kind of rotate it a little bit just to make sure it's all nice and flat, right? Then I take the pin for the OUTDRIVE and I set it in place with these needle nose. Slide it right over, and now you'll see that there's hardly any play up and down. So now the OUTDRIVE is going through the ring gear, or through the diff, let's just call it, and the shims are pushing up on the OUTDRIVE because the shims are beneath the pin. So they're essentially pushing up on the OUTDRIVE and keeping the OUTDRIVE as far in as it can possibly be before it starts to bind on anything. And what that does is, because the OUTDRIVE is being pushed in, the cross pin is going to engage on the sun gear, and the sun gear is going to sit higher than it normally would. So if you take these 3 shims out, the sun gear will literally sit 3.8 of a millimeter further down than if you did use the shims. So the whole idea is you're trying to do that to both sides of the diff, so that the sun gears are basically being brought together in order to squeeze on the spider gears, so that they're all being pushed down together as close as possible, but not, obviously not too much, because then they won't have room to move. So this is where I say you get your durability from the fact that the teeth inside the gears, inside the diff itself, are being engaged as closely as possible, which gives each tooth more strength, because it's not relying on just the edge of the tooth, it's allowing it to actually engage the entire tooth. The way I usually do this is I put my friction plate, or actually, I don't even know what you call these, to be honest. I've seen different people call them different things. I like to call the one that goes in the middle the friction plate, because that's really what it's doing. So I don't know what you want to call these, like the end plates, you know? Actually, I'm out of order. So the next thing you want to do is put the friction plate on. This is always finicky. I'll tell you right off the rip, you know, this isn't always doesn't always go together quickly, because the unfortunate truth is that this stuff is finicky. Like it's tiny little parts. There's not really anything that this locks into. You know what I mean? It's not like it's like a automotive part where it goes mostly one way and that's it. The idea here is to try to get everything as centered as possible, because when you go to put the sun gear in, it has to go past the first plate, the friction plate, and the third plate. It all has to seat the right way. Otherwise, you think the sun gear is where it's supposed to be, and it's actually sitting higher because it's not locked into all the 3 parts. And then you end up with binding, and you end up with a situation where you think you have too many shims, when in actuality what you have is a sun gear that's not fully seated. So I'll go ahead and set that down. I'll rotate it slowly. All right. Oh, you hear that second click? That was it. That was the sun gear actually falling into the complete bottom, where it's going through this piece. And so let me take these off. It's going through all 3 of these. So you see the sun gear here has the cross cutout, right? That section right there has to go through this, then into this right here, as you can see, and then in through the third one that's set down onto the diff. So, all right, we've put the OUTDRIVE, the bearing, the O-ring. We replaced it with an Arrma O-ring, which, by the way, that is an Arrma O-ring. I will put all these part numbers up. Arrma O-ring, then we've set our plate, friction plate, and secondary plate. We put our sun gear on. Now that that's all in place, make sure this is all cleaned out. You can set your diff cup, the actual cup itself. Now, this will pretty much stay in place because of these plates here. These plates, these engage into these corners here on the casting of the actual shape of the diff cup. So this will go right into place. Not really much, much there on that. And then what I do is I hold the sun gear, because it'll want to fall out when you flip it upside down. Bring this around like that. And then actually, you know what? I lied. So you've got everything there together. First thing you want to do is take some Loctite. And then here's another part of the process that I think maybe some people don't know, haven't heard of, or whatever the case. I take the actual Loctite and I put a tiny little dab in the bore, in the hole itself, on each corner, right? Put it 1, 2, 3, 4. And then I'll go ahead and kind of push it down in there so that it's inside the hole, not just sitting in a little bubble on top. Because what you want, and I've said this before, but you can go on Loctite's YouTube page. I'll put a tiny little dab again, because it's gonna sink into the hole. And you can see how they'll tell you right on their YouTube page that it's better to put the Loctite inside of the hole you're trying to get the Loctite into instead of the fastener itself. So I usually take a rag, take the excess off. Now I'll take that side, flip it upside down, put that down into here, and then I'll take this, the actual bolt, and I'll hold this and start one up. It's kind of finicky, so you want to, I'll try to tilt it so that I can get to the other side of it, but not turn it upside down so that so your sun gear doesn't fall out, along with the friction plate and all that stuff, because that stuff will all tend to fall out. So you got one in there. Remember now, all these parts are cleaned beforehand. And what I'll do is I'll put one on one side and one on the opposite side. So now you have an even clamping force. Now, obviously you want all four eventually, but for now we can put just the two just to get kind of a pre-assembly section done. So now that's tight. And then this is tight. All right, so now we basically have like the basis of how the rest of it's going to go together. Then obviously now you gotta put the spider gears in. So with the spider gears, not much going on here. You don't have to shim anything here or anything like that, but do take note that these little end plates here that go onto the spider gears do have a stamped side and like a flat side and a stamped side. So like you want the side that is flat to go towards the spider gear. Grab the other one. I have big mechanic hands, man. I can barely grab anything that's small off of anything. It's kind of annoying actually. So I would usually just slide in the pin from one side, slide in the other side, and typically these parts will just fall in place. And then I put my finger onto the middle of it and rotate it, make sure it all spins free. So we're good on that. Basically, you're gonna repeat this for the other side, making sure again that the flat side is going towards the spider gear. And then obviously you have the cross section here that is what locks these pins together. So you're gonna face this one down and rotate it because it's gonna engage into the other cross pin. And then you're just gonna set that down. Hopefully it doesn't fight me too much. Sometimes they do, man. And then again, once those two are seated, you'll see they go pretty far in. You'll put your finger on there and rotate it. Obviously, make sure everything moves free. Now, the last part of the process would be to, at the very least, set this side. So now, once again, you're gonna put your bearing. You're gonna put your OUTDRIVE, GPM OUTDRIVE. It's gonna push the O-ring out. I already had it in there. Put that down in there. You're gonna take your 7. You're gonna push the O-ring in. Set that back. I've already pre-selected my shims. Put that one. Bro, I've gotta invest on some, whoa, that's not what I wanted. On some gecko fingers, man. I have fat mechanic hands, dude. I have a hard time picking anything up that's small off of any surface. It's pretty annoying sometimes, to be honest. And then we put our cross pin in. All right, so on this side, what's cool about this side, once you've got all this done, what's cool about this side is that you'll set everything in, make sure your pin is centered. That's another part, is that little pin that holds the OUTDRIVE in, that needs to be as centered as possible. It just makes it easier when you go to put this on and finish the assembly. So you want to put that as centered as possible. Once you've got your shims and your O-ring and your pin in, that can be kind of set aside, right? Now you can take your sun gear, you set your sun gear in first. Again, kind of rotating, make sure it's all the way seated in there, right? And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna set it to where it's the little bosses for the pin are gonna be or up and down, left and right. It's gonna match the cross pins here. So you're gonna go left to right, up and down. It's gonna be right, centered, middle. Now, this part's a little easier because what you'll do is you'll set down this first plate, right? Then you'll set down the friction plate, that'll lock in. Then you'll set down this third section. Again, these have a way that they go. There's a flat side and a beveled edge side. When you put these in, you want the first one to go flat side up and then the second one to go flat side down. All right, now that's all set and pretty much centered. This is all set and centered. So then you literally can, actually no, I almost forgot. You want to put your Loctite down inside these bores. So you want to put a little dab there, little dab there, little dab there, little dab there. And then see if I can use, well, no, I'll go ahead and use this. Then I'll take the driver here and kind of push on that a little bit. Because what I want is the Loctite to go into the hole. I want it to fall in, down inside there. Now, obviously, I'm not putting fluid in this, okay? If you do want to put, I'm putting it together to this point just so that you can see, so we can finish the process and get to the next part where I'm going to show you how to actually shim it to the diff. Obviously, normally you'd put in whatever fluid is that you want. So if you're going to put 60,000, 30,000, if you're going to put 1 million, 20 million, whatever it is, you do that with the sun gear and the sun gear out of it. And what you want to do is fill it to where it's even with the cross pins in the center. All right, so put this down inside here, and this all should slide pretty much right in on its own. See? And then we want to line up the holes. And now we're going to go ahead and put some bolts in. Okay, one. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and tighten each side. And now when you spin that, I'll see if this can pick this up. So what you're hearing there is you're hearing the actual spider gears and sun gears all turning in unison, right? But they're so close together that it almost feels notchy, almost like a rifle. It's notchy, but it spins freely. There's no binding here, but it does feel notchy, and that's what you're looking for because you're right at that cusp. So imagine, okay, this is a good time to explain this a little bit again. Imagine we put 0.8 of a millimeter on each side of that sun gear to bring those sun gears together. Now take that 0.8 and you've got 1.6 millimeters of extra space if you weren't to shim them, where your sun gears, and if you think about the size of a sun gear, you know, I'll take this one out of here, you're talking 1.6 millimeters, okay, of extra space with a sun gear whose tooth is probably 2 millimeters. So now, if this is what I mean, if you don't shim them as close as possible without binding, then you're gonna have so much space between the sun gear, the spider gears, and the other sun gear that these essentially are riding on the edges of the teeth. You're not even getting the full engagement of the teeth. So again, this is what I'm saying. If you shim these things really nice and tight, obviously without binding, then what you're gonna get is the full engagement of all of the gears internally. And then that's gonna be where the strength comes from. That's gonna give you the ability, because you're still gonna wear these things out, you know what I mean? It's like any other thing, any other, you know, component that's moving, that's subjected to heat, you know, and impacts and stuff like that. You know, it's going to wear anyway. But at least you're at a position where it's so close together that by the time it does wear, you will have lost the least amount of space. So now it's nice and tight, right? So now the next part of this is like, okay, so you've shimmed your diff, everything's nice and smooth, but kind of feels a little notchy, which is okay as long as there's a little bit of resistance there, right? And then you set your diff assembly into the diff housing. Okay. This is the next part, because I see guys will break ring gears and they'll break pinions or both or whatever. So the ring gear itself is gonna mesh with the pinion, right? But the problem is that the pinion, when you put it in here, okay, you set that pinion in there, right? And you set this in here. Now you can hear that it's meshing, right? But now if it's gonna be hard to see on camera, I'll try to take a picture of this so that I can get like a nice close-up picture of the difference. But essentially, when you have this pinion in here and you haven't shimmed the pinion itself, how close, see if I can get this back out of here. How much of this, the teeth on, same thing with the internals of the diff. You're trying to control how much of this pinion gear engages into this ring gear. So you want these as close as possible with the most teeth engagement possible, again, without binding. So when you set this pinion gear inside this diff house, or this bulkhead, okay, there are shims that go on the back side of this this pinion, and I've already preset that here. And let's see, I haven't actually measured this. Let's see what shim size this is. 0.3, 0.2. So this is probably a 0.2. So this is a 0.2 millimeter shim. Now you're gonna take this shim and slide it onto the back side of this pinion, right? And then you're gonna put the pinion inside the diff, trying to keep the pinion down so that the shim doesn't fall off the pinion, and then it won't go in to the bulkhead. So now you've actually taken this pinion gear, right, in the bulkhead, and you've moved it forward 0.2 of a millimeter. And the reason I'm doing that is because without that shim, this pinion gear sits too far the other direction, and it doesn't engage completely with the ring gear. It'll end up to where the pinion is, let's say like the pinion's here, the ring gear's here, it's ending up to where the pinion's over here and the ring gear's here, and you're only engaging the edge of the teeth, not the entire tooth. So you move the pinion in towards the inside. Now the key is you can't go too far, because if you go too far, then when you put this in here, it's going to hit against the actual diff cup. So you got to make sure that you're going in as far as you can go while not actually rubbing against the diff cup itself. And then the other thing is like if you go too far, you could end up engaging into the ring gear too much, and then no matter what you do, you end up in a situation where it's too tight, and then the diff and the ring and pinion won't turn smoothly. So now you've shimmed the pinion to the bulkhead. Now, in some cases, okay, now that you've shimmed this side to the bulkhead and you've brought that pinion in where you want, right? Now, again, I haven't stated so far, which I should. This is gonna change every time. Okay, you can't follow this exact formula. You have to actually try. This is why I did this off camera, because you have to just try different shims until you get the right mesh. You're not always gonna have the same exact shims for every single diff setup. But now that you've put this, you can put your OUTDRIVE or your input cup on. But something I wanted to point out and to keep in mind is, in some cases, you'll end up with a situation where this input cup, right? Actually, let me take this back off. On the actual pinion, there's a raised edge on the outside of it and a raised edge on the inside of it. That's the side you want your set screw to lock into, because that's going to center the pinion, or it's going to center the input cup onto the pinion itself. So once you slide that on there and you tighten this down, obviously I haven't Loctited anything because we're just test fitting, right? Once you've locked this down, it's nice and tight. You want to spin it, make sure it spins nice and free. But here's another detail. You've put a shim on the inside of the pinion to bring the pinion in towards the inside of the bulkhead, closer to the ring gear. But in some cases, when you bring this in, you'll still have some space between the bulkhead bearing and the input cup, or the input cup, yeah. And so in that case, and you'll know this because when you put the shim in there and you lock this set screw in, you'll tug on the input drive, and you'll tug on it and you'll be able to move the entire pinion in and out. So in some cases, you'll have to put shims on the outside between the input drive and the pinion itself, so that you still have your mesh to the inside of the bulkhead, but you've also taken up any slack that's on the outside of the bulkhead. So you might have to use shims on both sides in order to get this right. Now, once you've locked that down, you've got this all good to go. Okay, you put your diff as an assembly in your bulkhead. This, like I said previously, I kind of built everything beforehand and then blocked everything down, make sure everything fits right before I did the video or started filming. But so there are shims that come from Arrma that go on the outside of this ring. Actually, this isn't it. There are shims that you'll need to put on the outside of the differential itself. Now, same principle with this, man. This is why I try to make these videos and try to be as explanatory as possible. But this is something you do have to play with. You gotta sit here and build diffs and try to deduce from building what works and what doesn't, and then you'll get a feel for how tight things are supposed to be and that kind of thing. So this shim can go on either side of this diff, right? This is meant, okay, these shims are meant to move this entire assembly to the right or to the left, okay? Which means that not only are you setting how far this pinion sits inside of the diff and how you can shim that, like I showed you earlier, but it also means that you can bring this differential assembly to the right or to the left in order to create the most ideal mesh between the ring and the pinion. So you not only have this one you need to adjust, but you also have the main assembly that you need to adjust. Now, off camera, I did already try some shimming, and I came to a point where I realized I don't need any shims. I don't need one on the left or one on the right. Without any shims at all, when I set this cover on here and I lock these, put these bolts in, we'll go ahead and do that now. Set this in here, set this down inside there. All right, and then we'll go here and snug that one up, snug that one up. Now, for the purposes of testing your fitment, you don't have to put all 4 bolts in. Now, unless you're using a stock Arrma plastic bulkhead. If you're using a stock Arrma plastic bulkhead, they distort more when you tighten down these cover bolts. So you'll have to put all 4 of them in to make sure your mesh is right. Now, I will also say, everything that I've talked about so far applies to all the Arrma diffs, whether you're using a stock one, an aftermarket one, a stock bulkhead or an aftermarket bulkhead or whatever. The principles are all the same. You're trying to use small shims to bring everything as close together as possible without any binding. So now I've locked this down, at least enough to be able to test my fitment, and you'll hear that it sounds a little notchy, right? But it spins freely. There's no binding at all. But there is a slight amount of room between that ring and that pinion. And the idea is, again, you're trying to bring the pinion in as far as you can without hitting this case. And you're trying to bring this ring gear in, or as far over, as close to this pinion as possible without this binding onto that. So now I put a 0.2 shim on the inside of this pinion, and I've used 0 shims to bring this this ring gear further or closer to the pinion. But I have a very, very good mesh, okay? Now, this diff, as it sits right here, obviously I'd have to put fluid in the diff itself for lubrication and all that, of course, obviously. But this diff itself would be ready. And I have several videos. I mean, if you just look again at my video library, you'll see I have a bunch of Arrma cars. They all run the RCAWD LSD diffs, and I don't have diff issues. I don't have diff brakes, sun gear brakes, spider brakes, and pinion or ring gear brakes. And now that I found these GPM OUTDRIVES, I definitely don't have any OUTDRIVE brakes. So yeah, man, this is all you need. Once you've got this set up the way I just showed you, you should be good to go. Again, I hope this helps somebody. If you have any questions, as usual, just leave them down in the comments. I'll try my best to get to it as soon as possible. I'm sure there might be some detail or another that maybe I just didn't think of that you might have a question on. But for the most part, it is here, it is explained. And as long as you can follow those steps, get all the shims that you need, and then just do a lot of test fitting, man. Just put it together, make sure it feels right, and if it's not right, take it all back apart and add shims, subtract shims as you need. Do not, it's like, my philosophy on this whole situation is the more time you take to make sure that this is right before you put it in your car, the more time you're gonna save yourself not having to fix this car when you're out bashing. You know what I mean? So take your time, make sure it's done right. Check the description for the parts list. I'll put all the shims and O-rings and everything else that I use on the description, and you should be good to go.